Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Yes, my friends, that is right. Welcome to today's program. It's a pleasure to be here, sitting behind the microphone in the Full Suite Wealth Studios. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to be part of the conversation, thoughts, questions, feedback, always be sure to accompany that with the appropriate amount of adoration and praise, which I got to tell you is about 10 to 15% more than you might first deem necessary when reaching out to yours truly. Just be advised about that. Todd at toddhuffshow.com is the email if you want to do that. I want to talk about the Epstein list today. I want to talk about what's happening. There's press conference. There's Trump calling this a hoax. There's just a vote in Congress, a petition being signed to try to bypass the normal committee rules so that this can actually get to a floor vote. There's a bunch of stuff going on here, and I want to go through this as fairly and as accurately as I know how. And so that's what we're going to do today, my friends. Before we get rocking and rolling too much here, friends, maybe you've reached that stage where managing your money feels more like juggling than just numbers. There's tax planning, there's estate work, investment choices, a whole lot more that you get into as your money grows, as your wealth grows. That's when family office services can really make a difference. Full Suite Wealth brings all those pieces together into one cohesive strategy. The family office's services they give you allow you to access a coordinated team with advanced options, strategies, private equity, private credit, and legal expertise. This is all under one roof, by the way. It's about simplifying. It's about making things easier and simpler for you so that you can do things like plan for the future and build your legacy with the team at Full Suite Wealth, making sure that legacy stays strong for generations. Are you ready for that next level of support? If so, check them out, fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. Friends, yesterday, Thomas Massie and Republican from the state of Kentucky, Commonwealth of Kentucky, I believe it's Commonwealth, and Ro Khanna, a Democrat from the People's Republic of California, they had a press conference at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and they invited survivors, people who have been victimized by Jeffrey Epstein and Jeffrey Epstein's network of people that were engaging in absolutely abhorrent, evil, reprehensible things with children many times. So they wanted to promote during this press conference the Epstein Files Transparency Act. This is H.R. 4405, and to talk about, to publicize what's called a discharge petition. Now, what is a discharge petition? Well, I'm glad you asked, my friends, because I've looked into this. You might remember that I studied political science at Butler University, spent a semester. I didn't just spend a semester at American University, but I was part of a semester program called the Justice Seminar back in the day. And so we would talk about some of these things, but this is one that I had to do some research on. If we talked about these things in class, I have to tell you it's been a long time, and I did not remember what this was. But effectively here, as I'm going through my notes to make sure, here we go. So there's something called a discharge petition in Congress. And what that means is that you can have enough, if you get a majority of the members of Congress to sign on to this petition, then you can bypass the normal process of going through committee to bring a vote to the floor. So, what they're trying to do is get a discharge petition filed so that there's a vote that's forced on this piece of legislation. Otherwise, they're concerned it won't get out of the committee. So, if this piece of legislation, I should say, passes, if they get 218 signatures on the discharge petition, that's an absolute majority of the House because there's 435 members, then that would force a vote. If the vote passes, if this would then pass Congress and pass the Senate as well, that would compel the Department of Justice to release nearly all Epstein-related records within 30 days with limited redactions for victim protection. So, any member, this process is like they've opened the door to Congress, to specifically the House Clerk's office, and any member of Congress can walk in there at any moment and sign the petition. Say, I'm one of the people who want this to be voted on the House floor without going through the committee process. And they're updated daily. These things are listed publicly. Now, there's a bit of a discrepancy. I don't know how. I haven't looked directly into this. ABC News said that there were 206 signatures that have been reported. Reuters is saying that at least 3 Republicans, Nancy Mace, Lauren Boebert, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, have all signed the petition, the 3 Republicans. So that would bring us closer to the 218 votes necessary. Now, I know this is a little bit in the weeds. I'm just trying to explain what was going on. So they're trying to bring attention to this issue, to the victims, and they're trying to say, here's our way of getting to justice. We're going to have a vote on this. We're going to release these files. Why haven't these files been released? All that sort of stuff. And that's kind of where we are in the process. So, it's important to note that the Oversight Committee has already posted 33,000 plus pages. Much of that was already known to the public. Look, there's just a big question mark here, right? What is the Epstein list? And this is where I want to stop and pause for a moment. I got to tell you, I braved the world of TikTok. I put clips of this program on TikTok. And lately, it's interesting to me, but lately the algorithm has taken me not to the conservatives on TikTok. No. I've been around a bunch of leftist lunatics. I've been called everything you can imagine. Simply by supporting Trump's policies, the left will call you, I don't want to even tell you on this show, some of the things I've been called. You can go and look at some of the comments on TikTok. Listen, you can disagree with me. You can be angry at me. You can say bad things about what you think about me. But some of this stuff is vulgar and vile. It's just straight from the pits of hell. Now, I think at a point in time, this stuff bothered me more than it. I don't care now. It's actually, listen, I'm not trying to start any problem. I'm here each and every day. I sit behind this microphone to help others hear and receive truth. Now, I know as a listener of this program, you might be one who thinks we've got it all figured out here. Now, we don't, but we do know things that are true. And those things that are true, we have to declare those from the mountaintops, because we also know that if there is, truth is not being proclaimed and spoken, if it's not being shared and passed on to the next generation, then that void will be filled with lies. And that's what's been happening. I mean, this is how our culture is an absolute disaster. I spend time on this program talking about whether or not men can be women, whether or not men can have babies. This is beyond anything that's remotely sane, but this is where our country has gone. And at its core, I've said this before and I'll say it again, I stand by it. At its core, this is a spiritual problem we have in this country. Now, certainly we have a political fight, but if you get down and you keep digging to the core, this is a spiritual problem. This is in many cases right versus wrong, good versus evil. It's not in every case. I don't want to overstate it because, friends, there can be healthy differences of opinion on things, and that's fine. But we have gone so far past that point that it's hard to even remember what that looked like in the past. But the things I'm called on there are quite, I don't know. I don't know if I've learned from Trump, and I've just doesn't bother me as much. It causes me to chuckle. I don't let someone else's opinion. Oftentimes, these aren't even opinions. These are intended to be weapons to shut you up, to get you to quit saying things with which they disagree. I mean, they have that is totally incapable of listening to reason and logic that doesn't just parrot the talking points of the left. I'm sure that there's conservatives like that too, and I'm not happy with people who behave like that. Listen, there's a time to fight for an issue, but at the core, we should be trying to persuade. Listen, I know that there are people who are hell-bent on doing things that are detrimental, that are dangerous in this country. I know that. I know that the radical left has a morally bankrupt worldview. I know that their politics is absolutely just horrific. It's terrible. It's disgusting. It leads to death, destruction, poverty, you name it. But that's not where most people are today. Most people still, the rank and file anyway, at least here in flyover country, there are still people who are reasonable. And, we should be trying to find ways to persuade and talk with them. And not everything is an issue of good versus evil, right versus wrong, but there's a lot more of that today than there was 20, 30, 50 years ago, at least as I see it. Now, there certainly were issues that were good versus evil throughout our history, but I don't think everything was like that. And it's become that today. And so you got to be careful where you end up, especially on TikTok, because they will, of course, try to effectively call you a pedophile, for example. Anyway, so I want to talk about this responsibly, which goes against the typical approach. So you've got these victims, Ann Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna, a Democrat and a Republican, who are at the Capitol having this press conference, sharing the stories of the victims, and also trying to get enough support so that this discharge petition goes through the House so that they can have a vote on this bill that would force the release of the documents. Now, there's things to notice here. Right now, they believe there's 206 signatures, roughly. Who knows? I don't know. I don't have an updated count, but they're trying to get to 218. So, but there are things already on the calendar, whether or not this happens or not. There's an estate subpoena, which is due here on September 8th. There's also an interview that Alex Acosta is scheduled to have with the House on September 19th. So what's the argument here? So if you look at the people who are saying, let's release this, which again, at one level, certainly I would say release this. Why can't we be transparent? Why are we trying to hide this? Trump campaigned in part on releasing the Epstein files. Now he's out there calling it a hoax. What does he mean? What's really going on? I'm going to do my best to at least explain it. You can decide from there what you think, but I'm going to do my best to do so. So the side that says release this says, look, the public deserves full transparency, that survivors have waited decades while the elites have escaped scrutiny, how they've skirted the law, as they've not been held accountable, as they've had these crimes covered up, ignored, denied. So if you pass a law that's going to force disclosure without endless stalling or selective releases, that's the point of the legislation. Now, whether that has other consequences, again, you can determine that. But the idea here is there's 30 days after this thing will get signed into law. You redact, protect people's identity, whatever, victims and so forth, but then you release these files to the American public. Survivors argue that this oversight dump was all these files, these 33,000 plus files that were released, were padded with documents that were already public, so there's not a lot of new information there, and that this law is the only way to really get all of this stuff out and to deliver it the truth. And when they hear Trump calling this a hoax, they say that demeans the victims, and that deepens the distrust that the American people have for our government, for our system of justice. Certainly a logical way of looking at things. Now, the other side of this, the people who are reluctant, Trump's side, Trump says, look, Trump's transparency has to be balanced with due process. Due process, by the way, this is something that we've talked about on this program. People saying that people who are being deported from this country for being here illegally are not getting due process. They are getting due process. They're not getting the same type of due process. Had they been deemed to, the Constitution would tell them they would have, had they been charged with a crime where they were going to be potentially facing jail time. Deportation is a process, illegal immigration is a process crime. It's the due process that you are afforded. It's different than if you go to the criminal justice system. The due process for illegal immigrants involves immigration courts. You don't get that. If you get arrested for committing a crime, alleged to have committed a crime, you don't go before an immigration judge. You go before a court that's seeking to determine if you are guilty, if you're a threat, to protect your rights, to give you a fair and speedy trial, all these sorts of things. But there's due process, even though they say that there's not, for people who are being deported for being here illegally. That's just different. But transparency says that that's important, but we also have to handle the due process rights of everybody involved. And listen, this is not listen, I know you start saying due process and you start saying that the people being charged are pedophiles. I remember people get very emotional, and understandably, right? Understandably, you start saying it starts to sound to some people like you're protecting the pedophiles, but the whole point of due process is to say no matter how heinous the crime, no matter what the allegations, you have certain rights. There's a process that the state has to follow, the government has to follow, besides just throwing you into jail because, or worse, exacting revenge upon your head without proper legal representation. This sort of thing happened. This was, at the far end of that spectrum, going in that direction, are things like the Salem witch trials, where you're just accused, and because it's such a scary, intimidating, evil thing, people would take drastic steps and avoid a process of whereby someone could present a defense and, be questioned or be judged by a jury of his peers, those sorts of things. This is exactly why the founders put this sort of system together. I remember when I was called to be a juror, I've shared this before, I haven't shared this, I don't think I've shared this story. I remember sitting in the juror's box. I was one of the first 12 jurors that was called up to be determined if I was going to be on the final jury during jury selection. And I remember there was a guy sitting right next to me, and the defense attorney asked those of us in the pool, how do you feel about someone who's been charged of hurting children? Because the crime that was alleged to have committed and the crime for which the defendant in our case was ultimately convicted of involved the death of a 5-year-old little boy. It's a terrible story. Terrible, terrible story. Justice, I believe, was served in that verdict. But I remember one of the folks that was being considered for the jury, he was asked, can you give someone the presumption of innocence who's been charged with hurting a child? And he said no, because I can't see past it. That person that's been charged needs to just effectively, die is what he was effectively saying. And of course, the defense struck him from the jury because they didn't think he would be fair to have on a jury determining what would happen with their defendant, with their client. And so that's a real point of this, right? If some of these people are eventually going to be charged, there's going to be, if you just release a bunch of stuff, there's very likely going to be legal charges that these folks can't get a fair trial because they've been maligned and that people have a prejudice against them and so forth. That's a potential. I'm just saying potential. I'm not arguing that this should not be released. I'm just saying let's talk about this like adults and understand that, just understand what's going on here and what the fight's about. Even if you still come down on the side of I'm firmly on the side of releasing this, which is totally legitimate. But where else are you hearing this sort of analysis and discussion? I don't think that you hear it much of anywhere. More to get into. I just looked at the clock here. I want to tell you, my friends, we've been a partner with MyPillow since April of 2023, I believe. I remember we were in Florida when we got our first order of MyPillow products. I love their products. We have a pillow. We have their sheets. We have their towels. We have the dog bed. We have slippers. I may be forgetting something else. But I know many of you have purchased from MyPillow as well, listeners of this program. MyPillow says thank you for that. And they want to remind you that you can still get products at a discount by using promo code Todd at mypillow.com. Discounts on all those products that I mentioned and a whole lot of other products as well. mypillow.com. Promo code Todd will get you discounts on their wide range of products. So, the side that's a little bit more reluctant to release this, or at least wants to follow a slower, more methodical process. You could certainly say they're trying to cover it up. Certainly a possible explanation. But they're saying that, you have to balance this with due process. Oversight has subpoena power and can sequence release, responsibly protecting victims, avoiding damage to ongoing cases. That is a risk. Maybe it's a small risk. Maybe that risk is worth not, the benefits outweigh the risks. That's totally a legitimate conclusion. They say a 30-day dump would harm or could harm innocence, expose investigative methods, or potentially re-traumatize survivors if some of these things were not properly handled. Committee-led work is slower, but it preserves order and credibility. So it's clear that both sides, there's some that don't, but I think both sides are looking at transparency. But Trump says, listen, I have determined this is a hoax. And I want to talk about that. What does he mean? That's upset some people, understandably so. We'll get to that on the other side of the break, my friends. Sit tight. You're listening to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Program, by the way, brought to you by our friends at 48 Financial. Let's face it, there's a lot of companies out there that do not share your Christian faith, your Christian values. The good news is you don't have to invest in them. At 48 Financial, they specialize in biblically responsible investing. They'll help you screen out companies that go against your faith, go against your values. They'll create a plan that is tailored to your goals, and they'll handle the heavy lifting so that you can focus on what really matters. You want to see if your current investments align with your values, to what degree that they align with your values. Well, my friends, they've got a tool to help you do that. You can access that tool. By the way, I completed this assessment. It's very simple to do, not a lot of time involved, but it gets you some feedback that you can use on making some investment choices. 48financial.com/Todd. That's where you'll go. 48financial.com/Todd. 48 Financial, because your values matter and so does your money, my friends. So before the break, we were talking about just kind of the mechanics of what has to happen next with this discharge petition, what's going on, the victims sharing their stories. By the way, these are atrocious stories. This is wicked. This is evil. We have been, you and me, have been talking about these files, the release of these files, the hiding of the identities of the people involved. We talked about this. I had a previous program where we talked about the Epstein files. We talked about how Jeffrey Epstein could could have been arrested. He had been convicted previously in the state of Florida, I believe, but he was awaiting trial for federal charges, and he was alleged to have committed suicide, which I know there's a lot of questions and speculation about that. We got Ghislaine Maxwell out there as well. She's in prison. Well, that's a whole other discussion about what sort of conditions she's dealing with in prison, which is nothing, doesn't sound too tough. Definitely doesn't sound like what some of the January 6th people were facing. Anyway, I don't want to get into that, but the point is, we've been talking about this for some time. We don't talk about it daily. I know other people talk about this a lot more, but justice needs to be served. Justice needs to be served. And it certainly looks like this information has been hidden from the American public. Now, I want to say that it's probably more complicated. I mentioned this in the Todd Talk today. It doesn't appear, who knows, that there's one comprehensive list. It's not like a database that says this pervert paid for this service. Here is his name, his address, whatever. Doesn't appear that exists. Maybe it does. I don't think so, but who knows? So a lot of things like flight manifests, flight logs, who was on a plane. But just because you were on a plane with some perverted evildoer like Jeffrey Epstein, it doesn't necessarily mean that you were involved in that. I mean, I know it's hard for a lot of us average Americans to understand, but a lot of these folks know people. I don't know. I'm not defending any of the pedophiles out there. I want justice for those who committed the crimes and the heinous acts. That should go without saying. I also don't want people who to get caught up in this. I don't care their political party. I don't want a Democrat to get caught up in this if he didn't do anything illegal. Maybe he was hanging out with a guy that was questionable character at absolute best. But maybe he just, a lot of these folks are acquaintances, and there's they look at ways they can help one another they don't necessarily know, or they ignore. Maybe they just ignore the allegations. They don't know. They don't care. And maybe you could say that that's bad. I don't know. But there are certainly people that could have been on the airplane, or that were associated with him, or that were friends of his, connections, acquaintances, colleagues that maybe some didn't even know. That seems less likely the more you get to know him. But maybe they thought the allegations were fake. Maybe they just didn't want to know anything about it. I don't know. I'm not making excuses, but there's clearly a difference. We want justice for the victims, and that is 100% something that we should all be able to agree with. Now, so we got all this going on. We got the press conference. These women are sharing their stories. It's terrible. A lot of them are saying directly addressing the President of the United States. And it wasn't, he called this a hoax. He's called this a hoax for some time. Now, the question I have for you is, what do you think he means by this? What do you think he means by a hoax? A hoax. When you hear Trump call it a hoax, which I'm going to play a soundbite for you where he was asked about this yesterday, what do you think he means? Do you think he means the allegations are made up? Do you think he means the women are making these things up altogether, that none of this happened? Do you think he means that the Democrats are using it like they've used other things to interfere with what Trump is trying to accomplish in reshaping, or I guess fixing this nation, reshaping it back into its original image, undoing some of the damage caused by the left, the Democrat Party, and so forth? What do you think he means when he calls it a hoax? Here's a first soundbite. You're going to hear an introduction here at ABC News, and then you're going to hear Trump talking about this, expanding a little bit upon what he means by this being a hoax.
And just minutes after Epstein's survivors finished detailing their stories of abuse right there at the Capitol, President Trump had this to say in the Oval Office.
It's really a Democrat hoax because they're trying to get people to talk about something that's totally irrelevant to the success that we've had as a nation since I've been president.
Okay, I don't want to get into the feedback there from other people, but he said it's a hoax basically to keep from talking about the success we've had, the things that we're trying to accomplish here in this nation. I think it's clear that he's not saying that what the women, I hope it's the case, he's not saying that the women are making these stories up, that Jeffrey Epstein was somehow not guilty. That's not what Trump is saying. What he's saying, again, is this is being used, this is being wielded as an instrument to keep things from getting done, from trying to disparage his administration. Because let's be fair here, that none of this was even spoken about when Biden was in office. I'm amazed when I listen to the left. When I listen to the left out there accuse Trump of being a pedophile, accuse me of being a pedophile defender, or whatever else. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. Where were these people when Biden was in office? Where were these people all these years that people have been talking about this? This isn't like this just came up yesterday. This is not something that conservatives have been willing to accept. We want justice and accountability for the people who've done these heinous things. We want justice for the women. We also want the secretive, protective nature of our government to avoid accountability to be dismantled. This happens in many different levels, whether it's something as atrocious as what happened to these women, whether it's hiding expenses and USAID crap, and all sorts of other things, right? All sorts of other things that we've uncovered when it comes to federal dollars going to illegal immigrants, all this kind of stuff. The American people, the average conservative is sick of it, whether it's preventing justice and truth from prevailing, or whether it's simply playing games with the American people when it comes to the use of their tax dollars and the abuse of their liberties and that sort of thing. And so we want transparency here, and I'm still in favor of these files being released, but I also think that there needs to be some perspective on what this means. Just because someone's on a particular list, it doesn't necessarily, it might mean that he's the worst person in the world, but again, if he's on some document, it's not just going to be a list of people who had necessarily just paid for these, the abuse of women and children. We need to find who those people are, and they need to be held to account. And there's a lot of questions, a lot of reasonable questions that people have about this administration for seemingly just to get to this point and just to stop. Why did you stop? Why are we no longer trying to pursue this? Are things happening that we don't understand? Why did you lose an interest in this? And then suddenly, why does the left have an interest in this? And this is the part, listen, whether Trump and the administration are trying to protect people that are Republicans or donors or, people that they know who would be on the list as actual real clients or potential alleged clients of Epstein, whether they're trying to protect them or whether the other side is simply trying to make it look this way, trying to malign the administration and to prevent it from doing what it was elected to do because they want to basically cast a shadow over the administration for saying they're trying to hide things and so forth, when they didn't even have an interest in this list over the past 4 years. Both of these things are political abuses, and that's a part of this that's got to go as well. Whether you're trying to protect someone or whether you're trying to use this to be a political opportunist, we just want justice. And I think at the core, that's what needs to be the focus here. I wish it was, but everything is so highly politicized today, especially when you look at the stakes of what we're playing for here for the direction of this country. I got to take a break, my friend. Sit tight. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Third and final segment of today's program. By the way, freedommarketplace.net is where you can go to find businesses who are aligned with your values as a conservative. When we started this program 10 years ago, one of the things we first did when we had advertisers come on board, we started listing them on our website at toddhuffshow.com. And as we grew over the years, we got to the point where it was messy. There were so many logos, and I said, look, we can't do it this way anymore. We have to have like a searchable directory for these folks. And in the process of migrating that direction, we also thought, this could be a place where other conservative companies, freedom-loving companies, could advertise their products and services as well, give our listeners, our audience, a place to go to find companies that are pushing in the same direction that they are. And so we said, in addition to listing people who advertise on the program there, we also want to give other people the ability to advertise their products and services as well. And so Freedom Marketplace was born. You can see it at freedommarketplace.net. You can also learn more about it on our website, toddhuffshow.com. Liberty and business for all, my friends, at freedommarketplace.net. You might have heard Thomas Massie, representative from Kentucky, Republican. Yesterday, he said, when you want to kill, when you want to kill an issue, you introduce a placebo, which is an interesting comment to make. And what's he mean by that? Well, Massey's saying, look, whenever you want to find a cure for a problem in government, in this particular case, when you want to find a cure for what's happened to these women, when you want to see justice served, when it comes to Epstein and the people that would have been responsible for committing these heinous crimes against these women and children, then when you're wanting to kill that issue, you want it to go away, you don't want to deal with it, you don't want to expose the people who are involved, you try to introduce a placebo. In medicine, there's a placebo effect. When you do medical trials, they give some people in the trial group a placebo drug. It's not really a drug. It's just something that you take like you would be taking a drug or medication, and they measure. It's kind of the control group that they measure against. This is what people who took a pill that didn't do anything, this is what they experienced. Here's what people experienced when they took this particular drug. And some people actually have a positive response to the placebo effect because the power of the mind and all this sort of stuff, they think that they're getting better. And sometimes those sorts of things can have an impact on us physically. But the idea is that he's saying the government just wants to give everyone a placebo. They want to give them a pill and act like they're trying to treat the problem here, and they're not. And so Massey says the solution, the real treatment, is what we're trying to do here. Get this discharge petition signed. He says at the press conference yesterday, he claimed to only need 2 more signatures. So that'll get this called up for a vote on the House floor. We'll see what happens from there. Got some other hurdles to cross. Trump has come out and said that if you support this is basically a hostile act against the administration. Just closing thoughts on this, I guess, as I'm looking at the clock here and wrapping this up. Justice needs to be served for the victims of Epstein and the victims of the crimes committed by Epstein's clients, the victims that were harmed by them as well. To the degree that this is being politicized, which of course it's going to be just like anything else, but to the degree to which this is politicized, the degree to which people who didn't care about this metaphorically 5 minutes ago suddenly do because they see it as a way to stop politically what is happening in the country, what needs to happen. I'm not on board with that. But I also understand that if you want to clean up this country, you have to address these issues of real, authentic injustice, and that's what's been happening to these women, to these victims of Epstein and his clients. Now, at the same time, if files are released, we have to, again, there's going to be somebody's name somewhere that is not going to be guilty. They were just involved or knew, took a trip, and that sort of thing. I want the real criminals, the real perverts, the real evildoers to be held accountable. Hopefully we haven't gotten to the point in this country where we don't say that we don't want to see, where we're saying we don't care if the innocent gets swept up in this as well. Hopefully we don't say that anyone who just had a picture with Epstein is somehow a pedophile. I know some people will if it's for political purposes. And that's the thing I hate, perhaps, when you look at the fallout of all this. What's worse is the hate, the evil inflicted to these women. But when you look at how this is discussed and how this is carried about in the public, in discourse and so forth, the part of this that bothers me perhaps the most is how quickly people are to defend their side, their guy, and then accuse the other guy of evil when their guy did the same thing. I don't care the political party. If Trump is guilty, I'm not implying that he is, or if Biden is guilty or anybody in between, they should all face justice from this. No one should get away with this. No one should be protected, but no one should be politically targeted just because of some, just chance encounter or whatever as well. That's something we got to balance out. I'm out of time. Got to go. SDG.